Bratpack was more a response to what happened to me at DC. I was really angry about it. I was angry about how the structure of publishing comics was, what I saw going on inside the organizations, the sort of cynicism and rampant greed that people didn't even try to hide. And I just didn't fit into that. And I was just really angry about it. That's what Bratpack became. It was originally going to be a DC book. I had proposed it to Jeanette probably a year and a half earlier than it came out. And they had this side publishing unit called Paradox Press. And we were negotiating contracts right at the time that Swamp Thing 88 blew up. So I just took it.
Digging on the comics. Guess I still dig them when I'm 6x6. Digging my kicks. Digging on the comics. I like to save them. And I like to trade them. I read them. I need them. I'm living every page.
The entire comic book industry, besides Marvel and DC, is undervalued by the general public. As comic aficionados, as fans of the art form and the medium, we'd like to have a podcast out there that covers the entire rest of the industry, besides the so-called big two, besides just superheroes, though we'll cover them as well. And for that purpose, we will be your underguides. The E.O. Mac.
You old piece of shit.
Mr. Joe Fixit.
In your face like a can of milk.
And myself, Frank.
So how about that Bratpack?
Let me go get them. I was looking to see if there are any martial law t-shirts.
Oh, yeah. That's the one I had. I wore that throughout high school and junior high.
It is for sale for $150.
That's actually pretty good. I've seen it for $3.
Really?
Yeah. I think I could talk myself into doing something under $100. I don't think I could wear a shirt for $150. And I'm not going to frame a fucking shirt. I'm not a one to rock, one to stock kind of guy.
$199.
Yeah.
So you could take the artwork and just have somebody reproduce one for you.
But see, I've seen that artwork in print, and it's usually printed in black and white. So it's like...
No, I've seen it in color.
You ever seen it in color somewhere? Okay, something to consider. So, Mr. Fixit, you're the one who brought up reading Bratpack. You actually read it sometime late last year, if I remember correctly.
Well, right off the bat, I read Bratpack a while back, so it's slightly in my head.
Okay. Well, tell me this then. We've talked in the past, particularly the 1963 episode of Spawnometer, which, by the way, at some point later next month, I'm going to call you to finally have you read over your notes over the fucking Apex issue and get that one out of the way. You were reading Rick Veitch back in the 80s.
Yes.
Or at least you were reading 80s material in the 90s. You'd read the one. I don't think you read Heartburst, the Marvel graphic novel, right?
No.
You did eventually read the Swamp Thing material.
Yes. Oh, I love the Swamp Thing stuff. Yeah. Actually, do you remember going with me to a shop one time? We went to Nan's and I was missing some issues and I was trying to get the guy to cut me a deal basically. Because they weren't traded yet at the time, the Swamp Things. Mm-hmm. And you gave me the ones that had Arkham in them. And I was just fucking blown away.
Yeah.
Of Alan Moore
and that
stuff.
was actually, I guess that was an Alan Moore issue. But I did one of the ones I had when I was a kid in like 87 in their like a scratched and dinged section. They had the issue with Floronic Man on the cover. And on the inside has that big brawl between Batman and Killer Croc. Another instance of Killer Croc being a badass and loving him. And it was a Floronic Man centered story. I want to say Veitch drew that one. I guess that was still during the Alan Moore writing period.
Alan Moore left Swamp Thing with issue number 64. You're talking about number 66, the second issue of Rick Veitch's run with Alfredo Alcala. Veitch was the primary artist on 13 of the last issues of the Moore run, including the Patchwork Man story you bought as a child off the newsstand.
But that was one of the few issues that I would have read in the time period.
Well,
so that might have been the same issue for all I know. I might have sold you mine.
You gave them to me, and I remember reading them, falling in love with them. We went to that shop, and I tried to get the guy to cut me a deal. I think it was like the last arc or somewhat.
Okay.
And I remember telling the guy, "Come on, man, I'm gonna buy them all. Can you cut me a deal?" And he's like, "They're worth what they're worth." And he just left it. I was like, "Fucking asshole." And then I remember maybe a few months later, the trade started coming out. I was like, "Fuck him," and I waited for other trades.
Yeah.
But yes, I read Alan Moore Swamp Thing. I did read some of Rick Veitch's Swamp Thing as well. I've always wanted to read the unproduced cross, the cross that Jesus.
The one, yeah.
Yeah, that where Swamp Thing.
Did they ever like print the script or anything?
I want to say I saw a concept piece or something where it's like the cross and you see like Swamp Thing's face into the side
I
of
think
it.
that might have been the cover. I think they did produce the cover.
Okay, I think I saw that one time and thinking, oh my god, this is like not amazing, but it's just kind of wild and crazy. And that was it. And I read some of his Swamps Thing. It was okay.
DC talent hierarchy. I think they were beginning to see me as their golden boy after Alan left. They were looking for writers they could get behind, and I was going to do a crossover for all the dark supernatural comics. It was going to be called King Hell, and that's right at that time is when Swamp Thing 88 blew up, and I had to resign. So kind of walked away from all of that. I had to start over again, really, a career path. The self-publishing thing was really happening. Kevin and Peter were going great guns. Steve and Dave Sim and all those guys fell into that crowd, and it was like, it really worked well for me, I thought.
I wasn't a huge fan. It was just different.
Apparently, Veitch joked with Moore about what a suicide mission it was to be the guy who followed Alan Moore on Swamp Thing, and he's the only person who's crazy enough to do it, and he still managed to get himself bumped off the book because of what he ended up doing. So I think it was a bit of a point of pride that A, he was willing to take on that kind of assignment.
It takes balls, dude.
And B, he managed to go out on that kind of a bang, where he basically quit mainstream comics after that to a large degree. I mean, he's gone back to DC on occasion. He's done some Vertigo stuff, for instance, but he's never done anything really that substantial, and certainly not in the mainstream.
All right, so let's get into the Tundra Mirage movement. You get into creating your own characters. What is this all like? Did you have pent-up creative energy?
Yeah, exactly. But I just bought a house, so I was also financially strapped because we had to redo a lot of stuff in the house. So I was taking whatever work I could get, but at the same time, Kevin and Peter offered me a run on the Turtles. So I did that 3 issues of the Turtles, the river thing, and then after that, I did another one about Sky Highway, where the guys in the cars driving all around. And then Kevin and I did a Casey Jones miniseries. What was odd about that is we worked for very low rates. I think for writing, penciling, and inking, I was getting $100 a page. But on the back end, I was getting 50% of any profits. It worked great. So I didn't get much money up front. But afterwards, when it came out as a trade paperback or they do a poster of one of my things, you get a nice check, and that would be good. Mirage decided at some point to renege on that agreement. It wasn't written down. It was a handshake between Kevin and Peter and I. All the artists had worked that way. And all of a sudden, they gave Mirage over to these business guys who sent out this ultimatum. You either sign over all rights for $2,500 or you're out. And I refused to do it. A lot of guys needed the $2,500, or maybe they'd only done a couple of pages, but I'd done hundreds of pages. It created a really bad feeling between me and Peter and Kevin, who I was friends with. And it was hard to hang out with them because there was this elephant in the room of how they had sort of reneged on our agreement. And to this day, it's never been solved.
So when
I still own it.
When that comes down the pike, is this in the midst of you doing Maximortal for Tundra?
No, it's in the midst of me doing Bratpack.
Okay.
So Bratpack was my first Tundra book.
The thing is, I don't know why or how, but I read a lot of his other stuff. Like I read fucking The One. What was his Superman kid ripoff? Maximortal and fucking Bratpack.
What did you think of it? Because I remember Maximortal was coming out. It came out before.
I bought your trade.
Yeah. Was it a trade that I had? Okay. I thought I had some individual issues. I didn't recall if I had a trade or not. And I remember skimming them. And then in anticipation of this discussion, I did finally go back and read the Maximortal.
How'd it hold up?
I found it very ponderous. I didn't really see that it had much of a point to it. I mean, it was very much like Brightburn in that it's the dark Superman. And what would happen if Superboy had the powers of Superman? He'd just tear Pa Kent to pieces.
So, do you think it was his attempt at pulling a Miracle Man type story?
Sure.
With Kid Miracle?
Yeah.
Kid Miracle. I still remember that fucking
And again, I'm speaking from ignorance. I've still not read any of the Marvel Man, Miracle Man material. I mean, I've read a little tiny bit, but nothing substantial.
I know you got the trade, and I kind of want to go through your trade to see.
I got the omnibus.
But I want to see if they really print, because I have all the original stuff.
Yeah, because it's funny, because Mac was looking at the Marshal Law collection I brought with me, the hardcover, and he's like, that's a murder weapon. He's like, wait till you see the Miracle Man one.
Well, see, but I want to know if they kept all the stuff in the Miracle Man.
Yeah, what I'm going to end up doing, I'm going to end up sitting there, and I'm going to have scans on my computer up, and then the omnibus on the table, and just end up going back and forth and seeing what's been changed and what's remained the same. So once I do get, and I actually considered taking it with me on my last strip, but it's just too fucking heavy. It just would have been ridiculous.
I remember,
but I do intend to read it relatively soon.
Because I bought a lot of my Miracle Man stuff from you. Like I have the 3D book from you. you.
Yeah, I definitely remember having. I remember having, but maybe one of the trades, like maybe the Apocrypha trade or something.
Yeah, I bought that from you, but you also had Dream Flying or Fly.
Okay,
Dream.
did I? Okay.
And I got that. I remember you had them on the wall.
I know I had some of the floppies, and the 3D one sounds familiar too.
I picked that up. I think even had some of the who wrote after more?
Neil Gaiman.
I think I have some of the Neil Gaiman stuff.
Okay,
too.
yeah.
I bought most of that stuff off of you or Grumpy's. I got some stuff from Grumpy's. I remember.
Grumpy's?
Yeah, the video store.
Yeah, they had Miracle Man there.
Yeah, don't you remember they had the comic books in the middle?
Yeah, I know, but I didn't think they had Miracle Man there.
I picked up some of Miracle Man stuff there.
Find your notes yet?
I don't think I took notes on Bratpack because I thought we were recording it like that weekend. This is bullshit. I take notes on all this shit when I read it.
I just remember the covers fucking got me.
I tell you what, my wife, she's been walking past that cover number 1 where home dude's shaving his legs and is cutting his legs, and she's like, every time I walk by that comic book, she's like, my skin crawls. And I'm like,
she gets a reaction. It gets a reaction.
Like, yeah, like, get the fuck out of here.
I just remember the book being really fucked up, and the artwork is a little unsettling to me. It makes me uncomfortable.
Explain.
I don't know. It's just there's something. It's not bad, not good. It's just very uncomfortable. But I enjoy reading it because it does.
It touches on very lowbrow, lewd, disgusting situations, but it does it kind of realistically.
But it
not
kind of enacts
like Kevin
emotion from me.
Kevin O'Neill is very cartoony.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like silly violence and debauchery, whereas here it's a little I don't know if it's grosser or I don't know. It's rendered almost too well sometimes, too realistically. I don't know. Does that make sense?
So
that doesn't make any sense. Everybody, ignore me. Nobody's going to comment on what I just said.
Yeah, no, I am.
You're ignoring me. You're moving on.
No, I'm jumping right on to that actually. Right. So back in the late '80s, there was an artist named Barry Blair, and he basically had a whole empire. I think his main place was Aircell, and what had happened was he'd been working for this air conditioning company, and they weren't doing well. They were Canadian too, so probably air conditioning in Canada in the '80s wasn't like today. Yeah, they probably used some back then, maybe not so much. So anyway, the air conditioning company wasn't working out, and so somehow Barry Blair convinced the owner to invest in doing comic books instead. So Barry Blair drew in a proto manga style, but he didn't tend to be more sexual, and he did a lot of erotic comics, right? And there was definitely a market for that back then. Print porn, especially in comic shops, was of value, right? But the thing of it is, again, he drew in a sort of a manga style, but it is American manga style, and all of his characters looked underage, especially the boys. And so you'd have these boys, even when they weren't erotic comic books, they would have bulges and stuff because they were always running around in like scantily clothed or in tight costumes and stuff. And it's like nobody ever found out anything unseemly about Blair. He worked for years for what eventually became like Marvel owns most of that shit now. Like technically Marvel owns a lot of that porn, since they bought all the Malibu properties, because Malibu came around and they basically ate up all these other smaller publishers like Aircell and Eternity and Adventure Comics and such. And once that happened, and once Barry Blair had finished paying off some debts that he had related to Aircell, he went and tried to form his own company, and for a little while he worked for Joseph Michael Linsner's Sirius, but he never could really make a go of it in the 90s, and also his art just suffered after a while. But again, nobody ever found anything about him, but it was always really fucking unnerving to people how he drew these sexualized, barely pubescent people. Even when they were supposed to be adults, it just bothered people, and that's why he didn't really get a lot of work outside of his little niche that he had before he died. It feels like almost like Rick Veitch is taking a page from that, like he recognized, because Barry Blair predated Rick Veitch's work on Bratpack, and so I almost feel like that's part of the zeitgeist, and he was like, well, I can do that. I can take from that unnerving quality that Blair has and apply it to teenage superheroes and really fuck with people, and he did. Now, Fixit, were you actually reading any of this stuff as it was coming out? Because this started in the late 80s, as I recall.
1990.
No.
90 to 91.
No.
My brother bought these. My brother had access to a comic shop. He liked dark, fucked up shit, of course, too, and he just had the access. I don't recall ever seeing any of these on any comic book stand, but he was going to a comic shop off of TC Jester that had mature readers books and would sell mature readers books to teenagers. And so he bought, I believe, the entire miniseries piecemeal. And at first it was just King Hell, as I recall. I think I read up a little bit about the making of this months ago, so hopefully you guys remember some of this shit. But it started off with just being King Hell, and I think as the series progressed, they partnered with Kitchen Sink, which helped them get better quality of printing and such. But it did have some pretty significant delays.
Frank, Kitchen Sink helped publish the final issues of the Maximortal. The branding on Bratpack was all King Hell, and Veitch's main association at the time was with Tundra. Here's an excerpt from a cartoonist Kayfabe Shoot interview.
Tundra came from Kevin and his uncle Quentin had lent Kevin the money, and Peter and Kevin the money to print the first Turtles book. And so Kevin wanted to take care of him. And plus, he was a great guy, real fun guy to be around. Kevin took all these ideas that we were floating around about how to do an alternative publishing company and put the bazillions he was making into it with Tundra. And I was part of the original brain trust that helped him conceive of it. Steve and I both were. And we saw it as a small boutique publisher that the first year would do 5 titles, the second year 10 titles, and the third year 15 titles. And that we had already zeroed in on, like, we wanted to get Alan in, we wanted to get Neil in, and that's how it started. That got me doing Bratpack. I was already working on Bratpack as a black and white comic, but by working with Tundra, it allowed me to go to the full tone and the nice paper and all of that stuff. So I elected to do it. It worked out really well. People tend to think Tundra was a giant failure, but my books did well. You know, it was kind of crazy on the organizational level, like starting a company. It was a functioning unit, at least until Kevin kind of went crazy and started overbuying projects. He got back from San Diego and we went in, and there on the wall were 72, 73 new projects he'd bought, and he had, like, you know, this tiny crew to do it. And that was the beginning of the end. He just couldn't make it work. He couldn't expand to get enough people, and he couldn't take care of the projects that he said he would. And so things began to unravel pretty quickly. But when it did, he was really gracious about it. And I got out of all those contracts, and I got all that material back, all the originals, all the films and everything. You know, he was a real gentleman about it.
Was it a nervous proposition, though, working on Bratpack after this thing happened over at Mirage?
Well, it was all happening at the same time.
But I remember reading this as it came out and definitely finding it disturbing. And I'd already read at least some of Marshal Law. I don't think I'd gotten the trade yet, so I don't think I'd read the whole story yet. I don't think I got the trade until like later in 90 or into 91. But I had read some Marshal Law, and I could definitely recognize that this was coming from a similar place. But I think it's interesting because everything I've read is that Rick Veitch takes superhero comics very, very seriously, and he has a deep, deep love for them. And it's weird because I feel like when Pat Mills and Kevin O'Neill were doing Marshal Law, Kevin O'Neill definitely has love for superhero comic books as well, and retro comics. And I think that's a shared love that he had with Alan Moore, who he worked with extensively in his last years, where Pat Mills just wanted to shit all over the medium. But because it was sort of superficial, this is a bunch of fascist wankery, let me make fun of it, it's fun when they do it. With Bratpack, Veitch is really looking at fucked up elements in the comics from a place of knowledge. And so it's much more intimate, and he knows like just which scabs to pick at, and he's doing it on purpose. It's very targeted. That intimacy makes it feel like it's a violation in a way that I don't feel as much toward Marshal Law. Marshal Law is just like Graffiti, where this is like intimate partner violence comic books.
Yeah, I mean, like the X-Men parody in this book, even on her tits, she's got pouches covering her. Like, it's silly.
Right.
It's adult, but it's still silly. You don't ever go silly in Bratpack. It's not silly.
They have flying cars and stuff, but the people are real human beings going through real fucked up human being shit in very graphic ways.
And do we want to recap the plot? You want me to read the wiki since we read this now?
I don't read the whole wiki.
Do?
I don't think that's really necessary. I mean, the gist of it is that there's a new generation of teen heroes being developed by the major vigilante characters that exist in the wake of the loss of the main superhero, the Maximortal. Very much like with Marshal Law, you have your Superman figure, and instead of Public Spirit, this one is the Maximortal. And the Maximortal was around for a long time as their Superman type, had a bunch of adventures, inspired the creation of a bunch of vigilante characters who, to my recollection, are non-powered. I don't think anybody has superpowers in this story. They just all have gadgets and technology. And so he disappears, and the characters that are left basically create this sort of fascist utopia. They picked a city, and they patrol the living shit out of it, and nobody does anything without them okaying it, but they're also very corrupt people. They haven't had anybody to look over them and make sure they were doing, oh, he's not the Maximortal, he's True Man in the story. The book is Maximortal, the character is True Man. So in his absence, they've basically been corrupt, and they've got these teen sidekicks who they license out and exploit. They appear to exploit them sexually in some cases, or attempt to exploit them sexually. They're definitely exploiting their visages. They're getting them to sign over their likenesses to be used on toys and cereals and all this kind of good stuff. Ultimately, they're basically treated as disposable. They're hinge people, and they're the people who take the really big risks. And when things go bad, they're the ones who take the big hits, while the major vigilante characters sort of look on and sneer. And so that's the kind of story we're looking at here.
Well, and it starts off essentially as a parody of the Jason Todd vote.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
To kill a Robin, and where it's all like a joke that we're going to kill this character, and we get to vote
It's
who
definitely
dies.
a condemnation of that mindset.
Right. So
yeah.
the main antagonist in the is it Dr. Blasphemy? Is that his name? Dr.
Blasphemy is the main bad guy.
Right. So he basically called into a radio show.
And I think you really have to describe him. People need to know what they're...
You describe him.
So the dude's in an all-black onesie, so he's essentially a silhouette. And then the head is a leather bondage mask with a vertical slit zipper like you would have on your crotch, rather than typically with GIMP masks.
A horizontal
They're
one,
horizontal.
yeah.
This one's vertical. And when you unzip it, he has a long, like venom-style tongue that he sticks out, and he basically hisses at you. Also, running down his chest piece toward his crotch is a series of curse symbols. You'd have like if a cartoon character were cursing. You'd have all those symbols. So blasphemy is like he's censored. And also, he doesn't have visible eyes. They're buttons. Sort of like the character from Nightbreed.
Nightbreed, yeah.
So basically, he calls into a local radio show about the Bratpack, and he's just like, "What if?" Was it just like asking him to vote if he should kill the Bratpack or not, or something like that? Wasn't that what the vote was? And suddenly, it's just like, so the hosts get all of his callers all amped up, like, "Yeah, let's take it to a vote," and they're calling like, I hate the fucking Bratpack. Yeah, kill him. We don't care. Laugh, 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 laugh. Until finally, like the final vote is done. So he's like, "Okay, you want me to kill him? I'll kill him," and then he just be blown.
Well, and also at the time he is pleading with them to stop. Please don't do this.
Yeah.
And they won't stop. So he's like, "Okay, well, I'm going to go kill him then. Your vote." And of course, afterwards, everybody's pissed off the DJ. "This is all your fault." It's like, "Are you the guys who were calling in? This isn't my fault." Yeah. And it probably bears noting too, Bratpack is, I don't think the name of the group, is it? Is it their actual proper name? Or is that sort of a euphemism they use for them?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
And of course, the Bratpack was a variation on the Rat Pack. The Rat Pack was, of course, Steve
Martin.
Not Steve Martin.
No.
Steve Lombard. No, not Steve Lombard. Steve Lawrence.
No, it was Sammy Davis Jr.
Sammy Davis Jr. Dean Martin.
Frank Sinatra.
Peter Lawrence, right?
I think so.
All those guys. Okay, so you had them, the Las Vegas guys in the 50s and 60s. And then in the 80s, you had the Bratpack, which is a playoff of that, which is your...
Emilio Estevez.
Yeah, your...
Judd Nelson.
Was Downey Jr. a part of the Bratpack?
No.
He was...
Or is he adjacent?
He's adjacent, yes. Him and
the true Bratpack came from...
Ali Sheedy. Basically the Breakfast Club.
The Breakfast Club.
I don't know if Anthony Michael Hall was a proper member of the Bratpack.
I say he is.
Yeah, and Judd Hirsch might be a bit of a... No, but I mean, like, there's actually a group of people that hung out together, too.
What about Molly Ringwald?
Like Rob Lowe wasn't in the Bratpack, who was firmly... he wasn't in the Breakfast Club, he was firmly in the Bratpack. But anyway, so it was a playoff of that, but with teen superheroes. So it's basically, this is a miniseries about the Teen Titans, essentially.
So anyway, after he kills the Bratpack, we then go through the process of all of these main superheroes have all lost their sidekicks, and they go out and they're recruiting new kids' sidekicks. And then over the course of this, what's the kid's name that survives?
You got the dead kid. I don't remember his name either, but he was the Robin analog.
The Robin, so he jumps in a trash can when this bomb goes off in a car. Well,
there's also a situation where because the Midnight Mink was like the bestest friend of True Man actually shared some of his blood with him, which it might have, I want to say, didn't they have an explicit reference to HIV? Like maybe he had HIV and he got the blood infusion to cure the HIV.
Yep.
And so it makes him more difficult to kill and invulnerable to most things. And he shared his blood with the Robin analog. And so this zombified version continues to like hang around this church where all the kids were recruited from. There's one priest that basically got forced into helping the vigilantes recruit each generation of young heroes. And so the Robin guy is hanging out in the belfry, eating pigeons, creeping anybody out that comes across him because he's still animated by the Truman blood.
Right. So then the story kind of just becomes the saga of each of these new Bratpack kids being slowly twisted and abused and tortured by their mentors.
Yeah, you've got the one worn out Amazonian type chick who like talks about, using sex as a weapon and shit, and basically turns out her sidekick. You've got the one guy who's very much like the far right law and order guy, and he's a sadist, and so he basically turns his protege into both a sadist and a masochist. Is like he takes all kinds of punishment and goes through all this brutal initiations and stuff, but he turns around and brutalizes the other members of the Bratpack. So you've got that vicious cycle there. You've got the Robin analog. He's the only one who's slowly becoming aware of what's going on. And initially he was the biggest fucking suck up, but as things progress and get worse and worse, he starts to come to terms with how wrong everything is. But by that point, nobody's wanting to hear him anymore. There's a lot of homophobia in the book. Intentional. It's not like the creator has homophobia. It's that they're exploring that as a theme, particularly where it comes to Midnight Mink, who I think is actually probably the most interesting of the veteran vigilantes. He has the coolest stuff to do. He has the most fun with him, but he's definitely a mincing queer. He's definitely prancing around and playing into the stereotypes. And because he does that, everybody makes assumptions about their wannabe Robin, and they brutalize him through their own homophobia. So you've got this cycle where you've got proudly gay hero who's like really rubbing it in people's faces, very much in like a John Waters divine kind of mode. I'm untouchable, so I can fuck with all of you guys. His sidekick is very touchable though, in a variety of ways. series, and it ends up making things really hard for him as a result. So he's the one who actually has to deal with the consequences of how overt his mentor is.
There's a Green Arrow guy, right?
Yeah, that's the most boring one because he's basically just the drinker, and his sidekick pops pills and drinks, and he's just kind of an asshole who runs around on a skateboard, that like hoverboard thing.
Yeah, hoverboard.
But they didn't really do a lot with him. He was definitely the most boring of the lot.
Yep. How does the book end? Help me. I'm starting to. I know how it ends.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to remember how they get there.
The book actually has two endings. That's one of the things I need to look at right quick. Because what had happened was they did the original 5-issue miniseries, and then later on, I think he went to do a Maximortal, and I think he wanted to tie the two books in together more closely. So he changes the ending of the book, and because it's been months since we've read the fucking thing, I don't really remember what the differences were. They were expansive, but not necessarily super meaningful. The one thing that got me was that Dr. Blasphemy shows up and starts fucking with the teen heroes at the end, and they all start to team up and just fucking brutalizing the Robin analog. And then at the end, Blasphemy whispers into the kid's ear and fries his brain. And it turns out that he has a prosthetic that has acid in it, and so he ends up dripping acid into this kid's ear canal to fry his brain. It's a really striking visual. And again, the guy's dead, and then all this lightning starts to appear, and it seems like they somehow managed to summon True Man, and True Man appears to proceed to kill off all the superheroes. And then at the end, it turns out to be like the Butler guy. The Butler did it. The Alfred analog was responsible, and that's how that ends here. In the other one, True Man we see more of True Man coming back, and we see images of stuff that's going to happen in Maximortal. And I don't think they actually kill the kids, or they die in a different way. They definitely don't have the part where Black Blasphemy fries the kid's brain, because I thought that was one of the coolest moments in the miniseries, and they took it out of the revised version. So I'm not as into the revised version. And then you go into Maximortal, and it clearly doesn't end. So you have the Maximortal arrive on Earth in like the 1930s, and they're found by Ma and Pa Kent, but it's actually not a baby. It's like a little man who has superhuman powers, and he's some sort of homunculoid.
Homunculus. Jesus. You can't say fucking mongoloid anymore, Frank, even when it's not even the word you're trying to say.
And he is depowered if you get him back into the egg from which he sprang, and he ends up killing Pa Kent. And then there's all this thing with this guy called El Guano, who can mind control people by putting shit onto their heads. And so he usually forces them to wear a hat. People can detect them by them smelling like shit. And like this guy keeps fighting with the Maximortal, and the Maximortal's existence in like a Raiders of the Lost Ark style warehouse inspires the creation of a comic book character, because they're getting psychic emanations from the Maximortal. And so they create the character, but the character gets stolen from them. And then the guy's trying to fight for his rights against the comic book company. And it's all this like tiresome Cavalier and Clay, the umpteenth variation on the Siegel and Schuster seeking justice stuff. And I don't remember what happens. I think at some point the publisher gets killed, and then the Maximortal they turn the Maximortal into, there isn't actually an atomic bomb. What it is they drop the Maximortal inside of a bomb casing that's got the egg in it. And so that allows them to control it. And so he destroys everything with his heat vision. So like Hiroshima and Nagasaki were actually destroyed by Superman's heat vision, but it's the Maximortal. And then it just sort of ends because they ran out of money because the bubble was happening, that was bursting. And there was supposed to be a follow-up miniseries and like a young Maximortal series and all this shit, but it never came into being. Probably never will come into being. And so Maximortal is just sort of this abortive thing. I don't recommend reading it. It's not very good. It doesn't really make its points very well.
Actually, Boy Maximortal #1 was released on October 18th, 2017, as part of Amazon's CreateSpace independent publishing platform. It is a 100-page edition sold for $4.99 on Kindle and $9.95 as a print edition exclusive to Amazon. The fourth and final chapter was released on April 2nd, 2023, and also reprints the two long out-of-print Bratpack Maximortal Super Specials from 1996. Since those ran about 60 pages, that means the Boy Maximortal finale is probably 40 pages.
And that's actually
the one?
I never have got to read the one. My brother had it. I remember thumbing through it. I've got it at home in a little packet that Bedrock City put it together in, but I've never actually sat down to read the thing. I know it had a lot of commercialism in it, and the whole thing was like the covers were all Andy Warhol style, Coca-Cola, Tide Box,
I bought the trade from your shop, and I remember I couldn't get through it because it's dense.
Yeah, it looked
super dense.
Well, we can't forget in Bratpack that there was the corporations. There was a whole thread of the corporations. So basically, the main heroes have contracts. The Bratpack has to exist for like royalties, and they have to do commercials and all that shit. And then once they reach a certain age, I think that the main heroes have to start splitting proceeds with them, which is why they keep killing them off.
Why do I feel like the boys is just martial law with Bratpack?
It is
rolled up, and then like the normies are like, "This is amazing." I'm like, "Bro, this shit."
It is amazing. The boys is amazing. You're doing this shit now. You keep trashing.
Oh no, I like the boys.
The boys is freaking amazing. Like,
but it's all cute.
It ain't.
It's kind of done better.
Well, then they should have licensed this shit for a fucking TV show, and they didn't do it. So I'm not going to shit on the boys for because these motherfuckers.
They did try to do Marshal Law for years, and they couldn't get it made. They tried to do an animation.
I love the boys. I've read all the trades. It ends really shitty, so I wonder how the show's going to end because it doesn't have a great ending. But
Garth Ennis is known for having bad endings. Like, none of his stuff has
honestly,
good endings.
I like the boys a lot, but the book's a little better. I don't like the way they did Mother's Milk.
I know you've said that we've talked about this before. I'm pretty sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to steal that.
That's okay. So back to Bratpack though.
Oh, that's what I was trying to find. Yes, they tried to make a movie out of it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I remember I found it on not Comic Trope, something Trope, and I follow them on Twitter, and they had just done like maybe last year a 15-minute video about like the Bratpack movie and how they were pushing it. I tried to watch it, didn't watch it, and I was like, fuck, I should watch it before this because it's supposed to be pretty cool. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find it, but I can't find it now. I put
you got the gist of it. Yeah. One of the reasons why Alan Moore and Rick Veitch are good friends is they both have that sort of 60s radical mentality. It's one of the things that they had problems with Image was that they thought this was going to be a collective where everybody's working together and sharing goals and trying to do good for the medium and for artists. And he recognized that the Image was still good for artists overall, but they were still a bunch of star fuckers and they were still a bunch of capitalists and they were about the money. Yeah. And that's why guys like Veitch and Bissett didn't have a place in Image once 1963 wrapped up, where Alan Moore clearly did because he could make the money where the other guys weren't. Definitely, I think that of the things I've read that Rick Veitch has done, I like Bratpack the best, but it's just such an ugly, mean-spirited story. And again, it's very uncomfortable and it's intentionally uncomfortable. It's very provocative. I think the covers are fantastic and are very iconic. I think the cover for the trade paperback is also really excellent. We don't have that in front of us though. And it's good art. Like you said, a very great work with the gray tones and everything else.
It's uncomfortable art.
It's just really uncomfortable and I don't enjoy it. It's no fun for me.
I was about to say that exact same thing. There is nothing fun about Bratpack. It's like you feel ashamed to be reading comic books.
Yeah.
Like I'm ashamed to be reading this. I'm ashamed that I enjoy what they're making fun of.
Yeah, it's like a Serbian film or I Spit on Your Grave where Grindhouse. It's like movies as endurance tests, comics as endurance tests. How fucked up can you go with this material? How hard can you go? It feels like it's a dare more than it is like a narrative. And I don't know that it ever really makes a point. I think it's all just about wallowing in the most sordid elements of the concept of teenage superheroes and realism in superhero comics and the fallacy of treating superhero comics as though they have any real bearing on the actual world. Certainly, I think a problem that we've had in recent years is the good versus evil narratives of superhero comics kind of seeping into the collective consciousness, and everybody's either a good guy or a bad guy, and so there's no gray. It's no fun. I think that's perhaps important work. I've definitely seen people. I think Heidi McDonald was the one who was saying that it was like Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, and Bratpack were like the pillars of the comic book arts, superhero storytelling, all that kind of good stuff. I just don't think that Bratpack is as strong as that would make you believe. I really feel like that role belongs to Marshal Law. As much as it is derivative of Watchmen, Bratpack is also derivative of Watchmen and Frank Miller. I think that Marshal Law contributes more to the discussion, where Bratpack is just wallowing in the worst elements of both. Like it's taking the stuff that Miller and Moore already did and just taking the worst elements of it and just wallowing in that shit. Whereas Marshal Law, I think, actively challenges, especially Frank Miller, actively challenges his glorification of vigilantism, fascism, where this doesn't do that. This basically, it's an anti-corporate screed to some degree. It's an anti-exploitation screed. I don't feel like it actually contributes anything to the discourse. You know, it's like, no shit, don't sexually molest teenagers. Like I needed that revelation to me in a comic book.
Yeah, over and over again in every issue, multiple times.
And again, it's like, again, in particular, I like to bring up I Spit on Your Grave, aka Dave the Woman, where it's a movie about a guy who supposedly saw, like the creator saw a woman get raped or was aware of a woman getting gang raped. And so he creates this revenge story about her getting the revenge that she didn't get in real life. But also the movie is like 45 minutes of her being gang raped in the most brutal fashion possible repeatedly. And it's like, okay, at what point are we supposed to be disgusted versus titillated? Because you could do something that's really horrifying and you could do it in a few minutes and you don't even have to be particularly explicit. And if you want to disgust people, you can do that and we can move on to the story. Whereas if you spend all this time with a very attractive naked woman getting brutalized, you got to be getting off.
Are you getting off on this?
Are you getting off on this, right? So I feel like Bratpack is getting off on it a little bit, and I'm just not super keen on that. I respect it. I'm not trying to demonize it. I think that it ought to be read. I do think that it's a valuable text. It has its place, but I've gone back to the story twice in 35 years or whatever it's been. There may be a third time at some point in the future, but 2 times out of the twice over I've read it and been like, don't feel good about having read it.
It's not a quick read either.
It's not a quick read. No,
I mean,
there's a lot going on.
Right, there's a lot going on for a 5-issue miniseries. I thought I was going to blow through that thing, and it was, and it was just like, oh, what issue we are on? Oh my god! But first page of the next issue, this guy's getting torture tested by his. Here we go. Now he's addicted to steroids, and it's just like, it's a lot, as the kids say. It's a lot.
Michael Haneke, Funny Games. I watched the original German version. I got a little ways in the American remake, which is essentially a shot-for-shot remake of the first one.
Is that the one where the killers actually acknowledge the audience?
Yeah, and the one part where they actually get the upper hand on the killers and they shoot the one, and the guy actually rewinds the film and stops the co-conspirator from getting killed, and they proceed to kill the family and then in the story.
I haven't seen that movie in so long.
Yeah, it's like I understand it's as an artistic work, as something intended to challenge the audience and challenge their predilections within this industry.
American Psycho.
Yeah, I've never rewatched American Psycho either. I watched it one time. I respected what they did there. I've had no desire to ever watch it again.
I've rewatched
and I definitely look at people who dress up as Patrick Bateman as concerning.
I don't get that.
Yeah, no, there are people who 100% want to be Patrick Bateman. They get like the exact wrong message from American Psycho. Well, those are people that make me worried. I don't want to live next to them.
I rewatched it a couple of months ago. It's really fucked up. Like, it's even more fucked up than I remembered when we watched it.
Yeah.
So I think we watched it together, didn't we?
You, me, and Pussycat watched it on video. Yeah.
And or we watched it, and it was a lot more fucked up than I remember. But I guess I maybe glossed over some of the movie when we watched it. Yeah.
Well, that you got the memes. It's when you see Huey Lewis and Weird Al Yankovic on Funny or Die, you tend to look at it differently, and then you go back and watch it, and you're like, oh, right, the coat hangers. Holy shit. Yeah, the chainsaw. Oh, yeah, that was fucked up.
Yeah, and that movie's been memed into eternity now. Like the scene where they're comparing business cards, that has been memed and edited to be a bunch of different things. Or the, why not, you stupid bastard. That scene, that's been like, it's a million. It's a million
memes. Movies where you don't know how it ends. Is he caught? Is he not caught? Because I rewatched it because I saw something talked about the movie. They're like, all the crazy ending movies you've watched in the past. And I sat there and I watched it and I'm like, I don't remember the ending. So I rewatched the movie and I'm like,
though,
did he get caught? Like, I couldn't remember.
It's probably more brutal to you now because I think at the time it wasn't as brutal. I think when you watch something like that now, you're like, holy shit. Well, like it's
I don't think that media challenges people as much as it used to. I think that so much of the media
it's a little more
sanitized
now, in some respects.
Some of it is being conscientious. There was a lot of exploitation, particularly of minority groups, where just the misogyny of American Psycho alone is not something that's very well tolerated today in culture and media. I think that the further we get from the 70s specifically, the less media gets created that's intended to challenge. I don't think anybody wants to pay for it. I don't think that anybody made a ton. I mean, maybe the American Psycho people made some money off that because it didn't cost a ton of money. But most of the time when they try to do that, it fails. And nobody wants the backlash from pissing a bunch of people off and doing something that's really truly controversial. So I think most people pussy out, but also I think that just you have creators that are a little bit more sensitive and they just don't want to go to the places that people went, full speed ahead on to be challenging. And obviously Mary Harron didn't intend to create a whole bunch of American Psychos with that movie, but also when you're watching the after effects, the fact that there are a ton of guys who model themselves after Patrick Bateman after seeing that movie, you might be like, I don't know if we should keep making stuff like this because this is fucking people up. Like Fight Club, there's all these people that want to be Tyler Durden. It's like the message you were supposed to get from that movie was not, I want to be Tyler Durden. I want to be a space monkey, especially. Like you may want to be Tyler Durden, but do you want to be a space monkey? And a bunch of people want to be space monkeys. Like that wasn't what you were supposed. That wasn't the message. That wasn't the moral you were supposed to get from that movie.
I'm trying to think of some movie not too long ago that just came out. I want to say Punisher Warzone, where they interviewed the director, and she's like, I don't think people got the movie. Like, you're not supposed to root for the bad guys, and people did, and she was really shocked by that. I want to say
I think we just talked about it with Homelander. It's the same thing, where it's like people didn't get that Homelander was a piece of shit until this last season where they just went hard on it, and it's like you couldn't not see he was a piece of shit. It's like, wait a second, there are people who were like rooting for Homelander in this show? Like, who were these people? What are you talking about? This guy's a complete piece of shit. But he had fans. Very strange. And it's not like Walter White, where there's like, because there were people Walter White's the one where I would kind of get it, where some people were kind of rooting for him, even though he was a piece of shit. That one at least makes you think a little bit.
He transitioned into being a piece of shit. He didn't start out there.
Right.
He just got progressively darker and was able to successfully rationalize that to himself, but also apparently to a large segment of the audience.
Well, and I think some of the audience, you're rooting that maybe he can go back to, maybe he can just get out of this shit and go back to his family and go back to teaching or whatever. Like, so you have that point of reference that maybe he can get back there. So, but I'm saying, like with stuff like Homelander or Patrick Bateman, there is no gray area. There should be no battling over whether or not. Very bizarre, very strange. I don't get it.
I agree.
So yeah, Bratpack, it's an accomplished work. Probably any serious comic fan, particularly if they're wanting to criticize besides the medium of superheroes, should read it at least once, but you don't need to read it twice necessarily.
Like you said, it has its place.
Yeah.
You should probably.
And the iconography is very strong. Those covers are very, very striking.
Yeah, but it's not hack work. It's well written. It's well drawn. It's just
I still don't feel like Veitch's strong suit is in the writing though, and I do think that I would be drawn more to the work and be more prone to recommending it if the writing were stronger. I think at the moment,
it's not some incoherent indie book,
right?
Where guys we're gonna
yeah.
draw them fucking, and it's gonna, that's not what I'm talking about. This is the effort went into
when
this
people
book.
are talking, their dialogue sounds like the way people would actually talk. People are doing things you could believe them actually doing. It's just that, like, in terms of the structure and the overarching story, I don't know that I see the point. And I get that a lot with Rick Veitch's stuff, where it's like he shows you a bunch of shit. It's like, okay, that's competently expressed, but what was the point of that? And I don't ever get the point for the most part of his works. I think that's an area where part of the reason why he's not one of these seminal figures in comics and why he's not revered in the way that some of these other people are, even though he's closely associated with some of the big people in the history of comics. But he himself is still generally thought of more as an artist than a writer. And I think it's because he has trouble with it all.
Driving the point home,
everything is like it's still like 70s cinema where people were just sort of meander about and stuff. And that worked pretty well in the 70s when you had a nation that didn't really know where it was going and didn't know if they knew what the point of their existence was. But when you're still doing that in the 90s and the 2000s, it's like, well, maybe you should have just figured out some kind of point. Maybe you do need to find an end game for the story, and it can't just be like this long vignette of, well, look at where these people are at and how lousy that was. It's like, what was the point? And I don't think that he's really good at that element.
I did the one first, which I don't know how much you want to go into that.
Yeah, we can talk about that for sure. That's another title at Epic, at Marvel, and probably some of your early, I don't know if deconstruction's right, but
that's the word, yeah.
Thoughts on superheroes and how they might have some literary mileage left.
Yeah, like most of the superhero comics were like really, really bad at that point. The only good stuff that was happening was what Frank Miller was doing on Daredevil. That was really worth reading, I thought. And so the sense among a bunch of us was that superheroes were kind of underplayed, or that they were kind of static, calcified in what they produced. And that we could, if you kind of expanded on what super people are about, you could like create like a whole new level of readership. And this is something Steve and I would talk about at Kubert School, was like, man, if they just had writers who wrote as well as like Isaac Asimov, superheroes would really take off, And so that was my attempt at it. Although, I had a lot to learn at that point. Alan Moore had just barely showed up on the scene with the early Marvel Mans. And that was definitely, as soon as I saw that, it was like, that's it. That guy's got it. I wasn't familiar enough with what he was doing or good enough to replicate it or even to operate on that level. But I could do my thing. And that's what the one was about. It's as much an underground comic as an overground comic, that same crazy sensibility, I think. I gotta say too, a word about Archie Goodwin, because Archie Goodwin made a lot of all this stuff happen and possible, because he was the editor at Epic, both for Epic Magazine and for The One. Brilliant guy, generous, helpful, honest, really wants to help you, not exploit you. He made all this stuff possible for me, and he watched over it as an editor would and made suggestions. The guy was just so talented and brilliant. I miss him terribly. He was a great man.
I wasn't entirely satisfied with the Bratpack episode. We'd all been months out from reading the book. Felt like the material was a little bit cold for us. I wasn't sure if I'd given Rick Veitch enough of a chance either. So I finally sat down with the pack of the one that I picked up. This is the original 1986 version. I understand now that IDW has reprinted the monthly issues on this, as well as put out a new collection since the late 2010s, I believe. They make some alterations I don't really like, so I'm glad to have the Epic issues. So the first issue has the Tide box converted into the one, the last word in Super Heroics, The Big Sleep. Story starts with, we're going to just call him Elon Musk. It's super rich asshole who interferes with geopolitics. And he's against the black screen, and you get the impression that this is sort of like documentary footage. And basically he's talking about engineering a standoff between the US and the USSR in the mid-80s, essentially forcing them to go nuclear. Whether or not they nuke or not, he's already set things up to where he's going to become an even richer person than he already is. Even though he's a chain smoker who sleeps sleeps on a mattress for no good reason. Then there's another sequence against a black screen with a punk rock chick. I can't tell for sure if she's a junkie or not. I'm pretty sure she is, but this, even though it's an epic miniseries, it exists in this weird place where they're not quite willing to go full mature readers with it. So I don't think anybody actually curses, which is really stupid. It's extremely distracting in a book like this for people to say fake curse words or to allude to drug habits that you don't actually get to see. I don't believe there's any proper nudity in the book. And I'm not saying that because I'm a horn dog or anything. I ain't got to see them titties. It's just, this is the sort of book that feels like it should be more gratuitous. And that restraint is just weird and off-putting. It doesn't really fit the material. So anyway, punk rock chick is hanging out with a bunch of druggy guys. And then all of a sudden everybody falls asleep, or the majority of the people fall asleep spontaneously, don't appear to be breathing. We see waves of these orange hues. Again, it's in a circular pattern. It resembles a Tide box. There's another stoner guy who's like a real dirtbag. And he figures, okay, well, now's the time to go running around stealing from everybody while they're asleep. Climbs up on top of the tallest building he can find because he figures he's going to have to defend his version of civilization against all comers. Very much survivalist mode, but also a reminder of all those people that were figuring out the blueprints for how they were going to survive the zombie apocalypse a few years back. So the nukes start to fly, but then the superhuman comes along and denukifies them. The missile still hits the Empire State Building, but it only does minimal damage relative to a missile hitting the damn building. Eventually, punk rock chick passes out, and the junkie guy carries her down all the stairs of the Empire State Building, and then runs into this nerdy guy who wears sunglasses, who's got crazy flying hair. And then moving forward, we have the U.S. military trying to blow up a couple of people in a car. What makes it a little bit weirder is that while they seem to be making out, it's actually supposedly brother and sister, and the girl has to stop the guy, and then the missile hits them, but they're superhumans. They survive the missile hit, and they go on to just dismantle this tank. Second issue has a variation on a US dollar featuring the nerdy guy, and this is one of the major alterations between the editions, the Epic issue and the IDW issue, is they tint it a different way so that it looks less like a dollar, which seems to defeat the purpose. And I don't think anybody is going to confuse a goddamn comic book with a currency, so I'm not sure what the fucking point of that was. Also, there's a seal on the dollar that's in the color shades of the one. This is a repeating motif. Essentially, the one is a black silhouette that has these colors on its face. At the center is a white circle, and then there's another, it's like a bullseye. There's a light yellow one, and then there's an orange one, and then there's a red one. And there are variations on this where there's like deeper blacks between each of the lines. That color sequence, that bullseye, is on the cover and has the lyrics, "I am he, as you are me, and we are all together." This is also the title of the issue. In the IDW version, they keep the title for the issue, but they take away the lyric from the cover. So as we progress, the dirtbag junkie guy catches a cop's bullet when everybody wakes back up again, and he has to be rescued by the nerdy guy. We see the USSR has taken information they got from the Nazis after World War II, where basically this entire town had been wiped out by this giant rat that they developed. And so they take that same technology and they use it to create a super Soviet guy where they have to strictly regulate how much he eats, and they've fed him all kinds of propaganda. Well, basically in the United States, they've done something similar. This brother and sister act are also superhumanly powerful, but I don't believe that they're supposed to be derived from the Nazis. Well, anyway, in Russia, there's a femme fatale who wants to be able to take control. She's been one of the key figures in creating the super soldier project there called Super Soviet. She's sleeping with the Soviet guy, and she's also sleeping with like the premier, and the premier gets pissed off and goes to arrest her, and then the Soviet super soldier runs off, and then he just starts eating things and becoming more and more of a monstrosity. On to the third issue, which is made to look like a calculator, but instead of numbers, it's got the faces of characters from the book. This one's called The Human Touch. The junkie chick, the punk rock chick, she's got a little boy that she neglects. The little boy is taken off with the one, the superhuman being that's stopping the nukes, and they're observing the American super soldiers, the Soviet super soldier, and they take him to some place like the Aurora Borealis or something, and the kid is given a vision that the one wants him to see. And we also determine, although they keep it a little bit ambiguous, but throughout the story it's confirmed that the one is the nerdy guy that helped the punk rock chick, who would run off with the dirtbag junkie guy for a while, but then she started feeling bad and went back to look for her son. Eventually some of her loser friends realize that the kid's missing, but then the one returns the kid, but the kid now has the same sunglasses as the nerdy guy. And when punk rock mom goes to spank the boy for running off with this dude, his sunglasses fall off, and you can see that his eyes have been covered over by flesh. Basically, there are indentations where the eyes used to be, but it's all just one fleshy mass now. Still has nostrils in the mouth. Issue number 4 is modeled after a can of Coca-Cola. So the American brother and sister superhuman act split up. The sister ends up fighting the Soviet super soldier. The brother ends up going to the USSR and just starts chopping up Russian soldiers. He runs into the femme fatale. He's obviously has a lot of sexual frustration that he's been wanting to work out with his sister, but she dare not, go along with that. So he ends up raping the Russian chick. Once again, this happens. She basically provokes him into a rape situation to, I guess, exert some sort of power over him, but we're not going to use naughty words or have joints. It's just fucking stupid. So the boy starts exhibiting powers like the One, and one of the girls, there's a black girl that's in the group who's banging some old guy. Why she's doing that, I don't know. For some reason, she brushes off the boy's face, and it turns out that it's just a mask anyway, and that he's become one of these silhouette One creatures with the bullseye on his face. The American super soldier gets her arm broken by the Soviet super soldier, who folds her up into a car and then tosses her into the bay. There continue to be these interstitials where characters from the book are elaborating upon the events or foreshadowing the events. I gotta be honest with you, I just started giving up on that shit. I think I got into the second issue before I realized there was a fucking nonsense. And also, as the book progresses, you realize it's not a documentary, and the circumstances under which these people are talking to you are just a fucking bullshit narrative conceit. So I just gave up on that shit. If there's anything pertinent in those interstitials, you guys can let me know. I don't really give a fuck though. Then we get to the one number 5. This one has the geek guy doing an Uncle Sam pose, I want you. It is a lot less effective than most of the other ones because ultimately it's just a geek guy. It just doesn't have the same resonance unless he's dressed up like Uncle Sam, which he is not. So the American super soldier comes back from Russia. He saves his sister. It turns out that she's not his sister after all. They find out that they were the subjects of a series of genetic experiments. Very similar, if you've seen Alien Resurrection, to how they kept cloning Ripley and the alien, that embryo that was in her, the queen that was in her, over and over and over again until they were finally able to separate them enough to where they had a distinct Ripley and a distinct alien queen that could birth more aliens. Well, that's what they've been doing with these experiments with the US super soldiers. There are all these busted up mutant versions of these siblings that aren't really siblings. They were that grown, and they were just given the backstory that they were orphans as a way of helping to control them and instill patriotism in them and yada yada yada. Eventually, the male American super soldier and the Soviet super soldier get into a fight, and they manage to basically break the neck of the Soviet super soldier. Meanwhile, the dirtbag junkie guy has been slowly accumulating an army under his power, and basically they're this great big flesh mass that he sits on top of. It's like a legion of ants, and they've got one king ant or queen ant or whatever on the top of it, and they're just sort of roaming around collecting more and more people and killing and doing whatever to anybody that comes in their path if they don't join up with the mass. And apparently the dirtbag junkie guy and the One are battling for the soul of the punk rock chick. No particular reason why she has to be the person that they're fighting over, except I guess that the One's kid version wants his mama to come out of everything okay. And then that issue ends with the One having eyeballs in his palms because it's a gnarly visual. It doesn't mean a fucking thing. And then we get the one number 6, which is a pretty great airbrush painting of a hamburger. It doesn't have anything to do with any fucking thing. It's just an Andy Warhol riff, imagery over substance. And by the way, because we're basically dealing with these absolutes where the One is sort of this collectivist, everybody's going to get past all their neuroses and nonsense, and we're all going to be one big happy family, or you're going to join up with the dirtbag junkie guy and be fucking carnivores and rapists and all this kind of shit. So you've got these absolute goods and absolute evils. And I realized somewhere in the course of reading the miniseries that, wait, is this the fucking Stand? Did this motherfucker read Stephen King and just basically replicate it with dumb superhero USS, USSR superhero nonsense bullshit, very dated from the 1980s? I think that's what this is. And it turns out that because of the nukes, their cycle of evolution that's supposed to happen was triggered early, and that's why the One's human form is a geek, because he's been prematurely created. But for the most part, they're able to get the majority of humanity to join up with the One and become one giant mecha One. And also they take the Earth's electromagnetic field with them, which fucks up the navigation on the Elon Musk guy, who basically had flown off into outer space and was hanging out in a space shuttle waiting for shit to settle down. Then he was going to come back, grab his caches of weapons, and rule what was left of the Earth. But because the Earth's magnetic field has been pulled away with the One, his gravitational controls don't work, and he crashes and dies, mostly because he didn't remember to pack cigarettes as a chain smoker on his space shuttle and had to land back on Earth to try to get some more smokes, and dies in the process. It's fucking ironic, y'all. At some point, the giant rat from the 1940s turns up alive after all, although it's slowly dying along with the rest of the Earth. And apparently the American super soldiers were cloned from Amelia Earhart and the Lindbergh baby, because Rick Veitch is just fucking tacky. And at the very, very end, we see all the human beings that join with the One, and they're basically in heaven. Everybody's naked. After 5 issues of not having nakedness, they finally realized, oh wait, we're epic. It's a creator-owned series. We can just do mature readership if we want to. So everybody's tits and dinglings are hanging out. Particularly the little boys' dingling is hanging out. So guess what? When IDW reprints it in the 20 teens, all of a sudden kids' dinglings ding-a-ling ain't hanging out no more. We had this thing in the 70s and 80s where we were like super cool with kids being naked and being around nudity. Shit did not work out very well. We all kind of stopped doing that shit for the most part. Can't show little boy ding-a-ling anymore. Not innocently anyway. Oh, and the one old junkie guy that was dating the black chick, he was like super obsessed with the Beatles, and he got overtaken by the one power while he was stoned. So he spends like several issues just doing nothing but singing Beatles lyrics, and these are the actual lyrics. And so at the end of the book, the little boy comes to him and tells him that inside the one, the Beatles have reunited, and they're singing "We All Live in a Yellow Submarine," and that's like the indication they finally reached nirvana. These people have. IDW was a lot more skittish about reprinting Beatles lyrics, so they're not the Beatles, they're, I don't know, some other bullshit name, and "We All Love in a Mellow Submarine" in that version, it's fucking stupid. And at the very end, the one is flying through like a multiverse, and you see the multiverse represented by a series of nebulas and star clusters within comic book panels that seem to go on to infinity. It very strongly recalls Alternity from the 1963 project. So having finally read the majority of the one, visually it's all right. Covers are cool. Interesting the way that they evoke this Warhol pop culture thing. Also very strongly recalls stuff that's going to happen in Watchmen. It'd be very difficult to not think that Alan Moore was reading his buddy Rick Veitch's project and basically doing it one better by creating Watchmen and borrowing a lot of its aesthetic and some of its themes. But also Watchmen is way fucking better than this bullshit. I also, in the interim, read Don Simpson's Bizarre Heroes #1. This is the original version, the one shot that they did in 1990 from Kitchen Sink Press. This is Don Simpson trying to do serious storytelling involving clones replacing people. And I thought the art was okay. I've never been a huge Don Simpson guy. It isn't as overwrought as his later stuff would be. You can actually take the story roughly seriously. It's not like some of the later stuff he did where he was so cartoonish that you're waiting for the joke that never comes. But it's not particularly compelling material. I can see why it didn't carry over past this one issue. And then it got incorporated into all of his Megaton Man shit. Speaking of which, also in the interim, this is sort of a sequel to the 1963 episode of Spawnometer. I picked up X amount of comics by Don Simpson. This is his 1963 WhenElse annual, where he essentially is deciding he's going to end 1963 for himself, which he has every right to do because he latered some of the issues and came up with the logo for the numbers 1963. So he's also got a fucking big axe to grind with Alan Moore, and so that's what a lot of this is. He starts out claiming that he feels like they need to resolve the story that happened in 1963, so he's going to do it with a bunch of analogs, but very quickly he starts bringing in his Megaton Man characters. He even brings in his Splitting Image characters, which is a way for him to use the Image Comics characters and also feature the Image Comics creators and resolve some bones he had with those guys, in part by killing several of them. A little bit of Hart Fisher shit going on there. And then of course they bring in the In Pictopia characters, and Simpson endlessly wants to remind everybody that Alan Moore had written the story in Fictopia, and he suggested it be Pictopia instead, and he thinks this is some kind of massive contribution to the fucking story. So those characters get brought in as well, and it's just this meandering thing. It just goes on and on and on. He references Del Close, who he was friends with. Del Close, of course, a famous improv comedian who also did some work in comic books, specifically with John Ostrander on Wasteland. He also did a bunch of Munden's Bar stuff. There's a documentary about Del Close. I think it's called Among Madmen, and they talk a lot about Wasteland. I have not seen it myself. I've just seen the trailer of it. So anyway, ultimately this descends into a bunch of fucking Megaton Man, dumbass Yarn Man characters. They're all themselves analogs of 1960s, mostly Marvel superheroes, and then comparing them to the analogs that Alan Moore created, that Simpson created analogs for, since he didn't have the legal right to use those characters in this annual, and then having them be the analogs of the characters that he already had existed and having them fight each other. If this sounds like a fucking wank fest, that's exactly what the fuck it is. It's tedious as fuck. I was so just tired reading through this. And at the end, there's a bunch of shit where he basically tries to explain how he's a contemporary of Alan Moore, and Moore actually borrowed a story element from one of his Megaton Mans for Watchmen, and basically trying to insert himself into comic book history like he actually fucking matters. I've never been a huge fan of Don Simpson. I respect some of his angles. I respect some of his criticisms of Alan Moore, but ultimately he's just fucking Don Simpson. And honestly, Rick Veitch is just fucking Rick Veitch. He's got a little bit more clout than Don Simpson. Neither one of these guys are ones for the ages. Neither one of these guys are going to be people that we're going to be talking about for fucking ever, you know, except in relation to the work they did with fucking Alan Moore. And I get that Don Simpson went off and he went to school and he got a doctorate in something, and he's still having to work bullshit jobs, and it would have made a lot more money for him to have Alan Moore's name on In Pictopia. But at the same time, it seems like a lot of his fucking bitching is just about how he's not able to exploit the Alan Moore name the way he could have, if not for Alan being such a little bitch about using his name. And And it's like, it's Alan's name. If he doesn't want his fucking name on his book, he doesn't have to have his name on his book. Quit fucking crying about it, Don Simpson. It also pisses me off because I'm looking at some of the pages where he's referencing material that supposedly Alan Moore used for Watchmen taken from Megaton Man. And the art is really, really heavily rendered. He just kind of goes nuts with it, but it's got a lot of eye appeal. It's honestly way better looking than the shit that I'm used to seeing him do. And I wish he had drawn like this more often, then maybe I would give a shit about him as a creator instead of being this fucking also-ran that does all these fucking funny books. And having spent fucking 80 some odd pages with this shit, I never want to have anything to do with anything Don Simpson does ever fucking again. As it is, I have my issues with Alan Moore. I have issues with some of his stances he's taken, some of the plays he's played, his fucking self-martyrdom bullshit. But mostly I'm just sick of all these goddamn hangers-on that continue to publish because of their association with him. And me being a sucker actually bought some of this shit and then subjected myself to it, did not enjoy it, didn't even get the opportunity to vent with the guys or, make Mr. Fixit tell me a little bit more about how he felt about the one. I'm instead like railing in isolation in the mail section to help fill out the Bratpack episode. God, fuck this shit. Good night, folks.
Digging on the comics. I like to trade them.
Willing passengers of Enter Guides include the Bat Pod, Between the Pages blog, Billy Hines on his way to bluer skies, Brother I, #SaveBone, #Supergiant Robot Brothers, Chris Dunford, Chris Lydon, Dave's Comic Heroes blog, Del Dracula, Dirk Ashton, Ed Moore, History of Comics on Film, I Was Joe Is, The Irredeemable Shag, Jennifer F., Julia Raoul, Kailash Jwalamukhi, writer and media in charge, Keith G. Baker, Kevin Stawiri, Manao Makako, Martin Gray, Maxo, Nick, Pop Culture Affidavit, who wrote, a couple of months ago, I finally found issue number 10 of Star Slayer at my local comic shop and completed the entire run, including the Pacific Comics issues. It's a great book, even though it stumbles in places. Professor Frenzy, Randy Caldwell, Rana Mike, who wrote, all right, I just started reading Warp recently when I realized it was a Stuart Gordon thing. I feel like there's some definite foreshadowing of tropes from Reanimator there. Hey, do you guys need an other side invite? And it's like, no, I've got 3 personally right now and I can't get any of you guys to join up, so maybe someday. Relatively Geeky Podcast Network, Richard Field, Slangword Scott at bluesky.social, Speaker of the House Kirk Spencer, Ward Hill Terry, Resurrections, a Warlock and Thanos podcast, and Zwit Jameson. And sorry, I know I'm beating a dead horse. I just forgot to say that I feel like I was a little rough on Veitch. I think that his Roarin Rick's Rare Bit Fiends, where he does essentially a dream diary, is probably his best lane. The imagery in the one is strong. I especially like that closing panel, that Into the Alterniverse panel there. That was a really nice image. It's just that ultimately the whole story seemed to be about a bunch of boomer bullshit. One of these things where some straight white guy gets to smoke a bunch of pot and the Beatles reunite and everything's perfect and that's the happy ending for the entire human experience. And it just seems like some fucking indulgent shit. Same problem I had with Don Simpson. It's 2 guys who are just getting to indulge themselves, having that opportunity to go on and on and on about stupid fucking niggling bullshit, not really saying anything substantial and taking up space that could be taken by somebody who would have something substantial to say. So I think part of my problem is I'm just really offended by the entitlement, by having the opportunity to have a platform, and this is what they did with it.
The Underguise is a Rolled Spine podcast. All references to copyrighted works and audio clips employed are believed covered under fair use, with no infringement intended against their copyright holders. The views expressed in this podcast are assumed legitimate, truthful, and solely possessed by the speaker.